Somehow, I've never ranked the Dead Rising games. Like, just putting them from worst to best. It's weird to think I've been making videos on this franchise for going on 4 years now, yet you guys wouldn't have any way of knowing exactly what I think of each entry. So, let's fix that. Let's just rank every Dead Rising game in a tier list, going from the bottom to the top. We're only going to be focusing on the Dead Rising games that in some way try to play like an actual Dead Rising game, so those mobile shovelware card games don't count. This leaves us with 10 games, and my criteria will be largely based on starting from level 1 with a fresh run, since that's how I prefer to play these games, and thus it's what I have the most experience with. The tiers are as follows. E tier is for worthless, D tier is for bad, C is for mid, B is for good, A is for great, and S is reserved for number 1. These are not my full thoughts on the game, and instead, I'm prioritizing what parts define the experience for me personally with each entry. The background footage will also just be me casually playing each game, so the background noise squad are eating good with this one. And with that, be aware you're not gonna agree with me on this one. Like, I know for a fact there are some rankings that are gonna get a bit, spicy. But if that doesn't bother you, let's get yapping. The aptly titled Dead Rising Mobile is the one entry that makes the biggest effort to play like the mainline series, or at least what was mainline at the time, because it actually takes its notes from Chop Till You Drop. Given this is a mobile game at the beginning of the 2010s, I guess that's to be expected. However, while this is the one entry I never got to experience firsthand, I've never met a single person who had a positive thing to say about it. Everyone mentions that the controls are horrible to the point where it's painful to play. It's just clunky to move around, let alone defend yourself, and the gameplay makes that very easy to believe. The game struggles to not only load more than 10 zombies at a time, the pop-in for the mall itself is worse than Toy Story Racer, a PlayStation 1 game that was pushing the system to its limits. And the mall that it's struggling to load in at all is so small you could probably fit it in Leisure Park on the Wii. But what pushes it to E tier are the problems you cannot blame on its technical limitations. First, there are no missions beyond killing zombies and finding items. And those items are not anything important like getting food or weapons for the survivors. No, it's finding shoes or lottery tickets or fast food coupons. And when you are killing zombies, you're only killing zombies because they could not find room to put in the Raincoat Cult. So instead, when the game needs something more dangerous for you to fight, there are mad zombies. They're giant zombies that don't respond to damage, they kill you in like 4 hits, and they don't take long to start getting spammed in groups of 3 or more. Worst of all though is that this game has the most toxic permadeath system I've ever seen. When you die, the only way to get revived is for someone else to own the game. How do they revive you when there's no co-op? Simple. You use your game to send a post on Twitter or Facebook, and if someone else spent $5 on this mess, they can revive you. Otherwise, that profile is locked off and you have to start from scratch if you want to continue. So, you lose all your items and levels. I think that alone should justify it being at the bottom. Especially since if you find a pirated copy of this, that feature no longer works. So, basically you have to beat the game on 1 life. Oh, and just to make it even worse, there's a hunger meter that will slowly kill you if you go too long without eating. The ability to play as Brad, Jesse, and Carlito are the only remotely redeeming characteristics this game has. And even then, they don't play any differently, they're all just reskins of Frank. But if you're one of the 5 people who played this game back when it was available, and back when it actually worked on mobile devices, it did receive more substantial updates than Deluxe Remaster did. Part of me actually wishes Capcom would release this mess on Steam, if for nothing more than preservation's sake. But then again, I'm probably the only person who would buy it.
I'm legally obligated to state the following. 3 hoes and a Merry Jesus birthday is on December 25th. Christmas is almost here!
Oh look, it's the Dead Rising 4 Christmas special again. I'm reusing my footage from the combo weapon tier list I did because it's not December and I don't feel like playing this game right now. But for those who don't feel like watching my old review, here's the Cliff Notes version. I don't hate this game. It has its moments and even its positives, but nearly every part of the core experience suffers from some kind of major problem. Frank's characterization is flat-out character assassination. The new characters don't fare much better. The story said characters go through reaches Resident Evil 6 levels of what the hell even is this franchise anymore. That story is also 75% of Frank playing catch-up to far more interesting events that have already happened off-screen. The map is a frustrating mixture of wide-open empty space and condensed locations that do not complement Frank's movement. The parkour system will have you vault over things you didn't mean to because you jumped too close to them, while failing to grab ledges that you really should have gotten because you were just a hint too close to the wall, so it thinks you're trying to slide down it. The game goes full-on Ubislop with the collectibles, especially compared to how Dead Rising 3 handled them. The combo weapons are pretty uninspired and on more than one occasion just don't work. The new inventory system leaves melee weapons feeling incredibly neutered. The common zombies deal damage without having to actually hit you. The fresh zombies are actual cancer to deal with. The exosuit is more restrictive than anything at the end of the day. The camera is only here out of contractual obligation because it no longer earns prestige points beyond the in-game challenges because they didn't have time to balance out the system. This isn't even an exhaustive list of everything wrong. It's just a run-on sentence that's run its course. Now, as I said, it's not completely without positives. The costume selection is phenomenal, the vehicle variety beats some of the GTA clones out there, the elemental damage was pretty well thought out, the faction system, where the enemies regularly fight each other if Frank's not around, was honestly the most engaging part of the gameplay. And Frank Rising is a pretty fun side mode, since the final update made Zombie Frank strong enough to actually survive it. But the positives are generally fleeting, while the cons are ever present. It's a frustrating game to play, the only entry in the series that brings me active displeasure to go through. But it's still for sale, and there's some things I can enjoy about it, so it'll get a D tier.
I'm gonna go to bed now. Nate.
Ah, the Diet Coke of Dead Rising. If Dead Rising 4 is the most frustrating entry in the series, Deluxe Remaster is the most disposable. This game could have never existed, and I don't think much of value would have been lost. When I look at the positives most talk about, the new books, the fixed AI pathfinding, and the bazooka being added, I have to ask if these all needed a full-blown remake on the RE engine, since that's a source of a lot of the moment-to-moment problems in the gameplay. Especially when compared to the impressive work of Off the Record Plus, I find it hard to believe that a competent group of modders couldn't achieve as much, if not more, while sticking to the original engine of Dead Rising 1. So that way Deluxe Remaster didn't feel like it was trying to recreate Dead Rising in Dreams with a premium entry fee. And those positives, they have caveats. The survivors have lost most of their unique characteristics from the OG game, which was really the only thing they had going for them over the Dead Rising 2 survivors or the posse members from Dead Rising 3. The rocket launcher is locked to Endgame and New Game Plus. There's no secret spawns for them around the map. So if you prefer playing Dead Rising starting from level 1, the weapon just doesn't exist 95% of the game. And the new books are a bit of a mixed bag, and there's a very noticeably broken combination of getting all the skill moves, the gun damage boosting book, and the one that freely spawns OP weapons from any cardboard box. It severely undermines the rebalancing efforts this game went through. I could go on, I'm frankly very tempted to, but I already made a whole review on Deluxe Remaster. For this video, the main appeal of the first Dead Rising was that it was fast, everything was snappy, and the game was demanding, though not always for fair reasons. None of that applies here. The animations are a lot slower, there's more lag to almost every action, and the game was made very easy to anyone with a passing understanding of the original title. And even though the only update was to fix bugs, a lot of bugs still remain. Throwing weapons are not affected by damage upgrades properly, zombies can pass through attacks and level geometry, and when recording this footage, I actually had a bit where Isabella shot her handgun backwards, through her torso, to shoot me, because unlike the original game, she couldn't be bothered to turn around. Speaking of that background footage, I will say I have come to enjoy the new take on the Infinity mode. It's really the only thing that ever tempts me to revisit the game. But even this mode I get limited fun from, since the special forces are spam starting on day 3 in every location, which requires you to abuse the fact that any enemy or zombie can drop items. So, the goal of the mode goes from rationing your healing items, and instead devolves into, well, I'm running low on food, time to run with a chainsaw in Alfresca Plaza until the game gives me a steak. Huh. Running with Chainsaws would be a really good title for a Dead Rising podcast. If anyone out there wants to use that, be my guest. I'm not much of a podcast guy. Getting back on track, Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster just doesn't feel that great to play. In fact, if it didn't have Dead Rising 1's source code as a baseline, this would have absolutely been another Dead Rising 4 level disaster, because it's frankly about as well polished.
We would like to play.
Moving on to C tier, we have Chop Till You Drop, a game that's honestly better than it has any right to be. Dead Rising and RE4 don't have that much in common, and it definitely doesn't hit the highs of either of its inspirations. You can't hold multiple melee weapons beyond a single normal and single heavy melee weapon, and you can't upgrade your guns like in RE4. However, Cletus being the merchant is a natural fit for him, the money mechanic complements the series, as Dead Rising 2 would show a few years later, and they managed to bring over the existing RE4 enemy types while not straying too far away from Dead Rising. Making the throwables into stackable pseudo-grenades was a pretty smart move. The food items working like herbs is clever once you realize how it actually works. And making it so all of the gore effects and the skill moves apply to the cultists and the special forces gives it a level of grisliness that the original didn't quite have. Somehow, the RE4 remake team pulled off a decent game here. However, the survivor missions do really bring it down. They're no longer optional, which is fine for me personally, they're basically the main content of any given Dead Rising game, but the game's structure is just not open. Instead of being in an open world, it's now mission-based, where you're timed for ranks. Think of comparing the original Luigi's Mansion to its 3DS sequel. And the missions do not activate at the same time. They do change the mission spawn time so it's not immediately obvious. You know, it's not going to be like you're going to save Bert and Aaron, but Leia doesn't spawn because you didn't select her mission. But it does throw off the flow of gameplay while emphasizing how limited Dead Rising's side missions are. Most Survivor missions are just a lot of talking, with some basic escorting and the occasional curveball, like a fetch quest or branching option. This is fine when they're both optional and an organic part of exploring the mall, but when you have to constantly go back to Otis in the security room to accept a mission, you really feel how limited it is. And none of the missions have been integrated into each other in the remake. There were some efforts to give some variety, like Ronald's mission now has him looking through Paradise Plaza for extra food after you find him, and the Japanese tourists can spawn in different rooms in Wonderland Plaza on higher settings, but it doesn't stop them from just bleeding together after a while. The worst casualty of this has got to be the gun shop trio, as you have to go to them, then they want a picture of the vents, so you go back to the vents, then you go back to them, and then you take them back to the vents. That is just the entirety of the mission now. Thankfully, the boss fights fare better. Most of them translate pretty well into this game, with the Hall family probably being the best they've ever been here. This is because in Shop Till You Drop, dodging is now a QTE event like it was in RE4, but you only have the option to dodge when you're not in aim mode. So, for the Hall family, and most bosses in general, it becomes a battle of when you try to get extra shots in, versus when you're on standby to avoid damage, a skill you'll absolutely need for the odd jobs. Cletus is greatly expanded upon as well, actually jumping over the counter after a while. Adam and Steven translate surprisingly well and have some extra interactions. Really, it's just Isabella's fight that isn't good, and it sucked in the original too. I know some people might also be upset that the convicts were turned into a QTE event in this game, but as sad as this is going to sound, it's probably the best they've ever been. There are 4 bosses in the game that got dropped, with 3 of them becoming zombie types. They work well for the combat system of this game, but I don't think zombie bosses need to return in future entries. I just think it's a shame that aside from some of the QTEs for Brock's battle and maybe the toy modding book being inspired by how strong the toy laser sword was in this game, nothing from Chop Till You Drop came back in Deluxe Remaster, because there's a lot of cool stuff here. But Capcom has little interest in remaking their more mid titles unless it's Resident Evil, and they already wasted the redo of the first Dead Rising, so a lot of the cool ideas this game had are forever trapped on the console that quite literally can't handle it. Now, moving forward, every game is going to be B tier or higher, which means every game is good or better, and they are all absolutely worth the asking price, especially since none of them cost more than $20 anymore, and you can often find them for less. So, while I'm going to get critical of some of these games, it's less I don't enjoy these games, and more so there's a reason that the next 5 didn't make it to number 1.
Let's go! You know what? No, we are not gambling. We're done gambling, dude. This is it.
Off the Record has a lot of little details I really enjoy. I like the fact that you start with the jump kick, the heavy attack, and the dodge roll. The fact that you keep your momentum from the jump kick, and that Frank stops himself from walking off edges are both really nice details, even with the occasionally frustrating side effects with certain platforming segments. The attempts to emphasize the economic systems are generally welcome, and TK's demand for $1 million is one of those ideas that you really wonder how they didn't think of it for the original game. Some of the new combo weapons are really fun, and the Uranus Zone is pretty cool to explore. The looters using money hackers and Molotovs, with both them and the mercenaries being more present, are great. TJR gives a fantastic performance as Frank West, which might be the best voice acting in the franchise. And both Chuck and Evan are some of the best bosses in the series. I get why many people have this as their favorite Dead Rising game, especially since it's built on the already really strong Dead Rising 2. However, there's a reason I'm not one of them. I absolutely have my frustrations with this game compared to the base version. The biggest of which is the survivors, or more accurately how when they get grabbed, their health drains until they die, or something interrupts the grapple. This requires you to go back to the Dead Rising 1 method of stopping every 10 seconds to let them catch up. I didn't mind it back then, because the missions were rapidly available, the mall was relatively small, and queens were readily available. But Fortune City is nearly twice the size of the Parkview Mall. The game adjusts the mission start time so that mass escorts are harder, and queens are still not available until roughly 2 hours into the game. Plus, the AI got nerfed pretty badly in Off the Record, and if you arm them with guns, their efforts to sidestep you to shoot the zombie behind you just leaves them open for more grabs. I'm not gonna mince words. If Off the Record didn't have the checkpoint system, I wouldn't bother with level 1 runs. That said, I don't think it was meant to be as frustrating as it ended up. A large part of why the survivors getting grappled sucks is because of how aggressive the zombies are. The interviews always talk about how they did this to make the game harder for Frank, and I mean fair enough, but I imagine this resulted in a case where two ideas worked against each other, because I would be fine with one or the other. Either make the zombies more aggressive so the player and survivors can't as easily pass through them, or make the survivors getting grappled like it is in Off the Record to compensate for the more passive horde during the daytime. But together, they can make Off the Record miserable on some playthroughs, especially in the early game. Survivors are good at one thing though, breaking through the boss super armor when their AI can register there's something dangerous nearby. Yeah, bosses now getting glorified iframes if you attack too many times or deal too much damage is really stupid. It forces you to play fair against bosses that have no such restrictions. If anything, they can now attack Frank when he's still in his recovering animations. I still remember one time when Carl took 8 blocks of health off me in like 3 seconds. As such, this adjusts the balance of the game to where the best weapons are just whatever can bypass this stupid mechanic. I'll admit that part of this is salt because this idea would go on to infect every Dead Rising game moving forward, including Deluxe Remaster, but there's also problems with it in this game. Namely, beyond learning that the pole weapon can bypass the damage cap, or that the shotguns can fire in a rhythm that avoid reaching it, bosses no longer feel that rewarding to experiment against. You very rarely find many weaknesses, and anything that does exceptional damage usually triggers the damage cap. It's a shame, because that experimentation is something that made Dead Rising bosses fun to refight. But putting aside all of these little frustrations, there's the other side of the coin with Off the Record's missed potential, almost all of which I'm positive is a result of its short development cycle. Let's take the Uranus Zone. Like I said, it's visually very cool, the new minigames are really fun when they work properly, and the space-themed outfits and combo weapons are neat. But that's about all it adds. Aside from a single terrible boss fight, none of the missions benefit from being in the Uranus Zone. Like, the one new survivor who's actually located there could have been put anywhere else, and the other 2 missions in the Uranus Zone actually were in other places in the base game. The same holds true for the Fortune City Bank. There's no reason for it to be in the Uranus Zone. There were literally security boxes in the base game you couldn't interact with, save for Lenny's mission, and that's without how lackluster the reward of most of those security boxes actually are. And sadly, that same disappointment applies to sandbox mode. The mission variety is respectable. It's amazing how something as simple as changing the starting location and the time limit can affect zombie kill challenges. But unlocking them through the zombie kills themselves is stupid. Needing 10,000 zombie kills before you can do all of them elevates it to moronic. By the way, for those of you who don't know, that's a good 2 hours of killing zombies in vehicles, and that's the fastest way to do it. Especially since, while your level and monies carry between the modes, the kills don't, so any zombie kills in story mode will not help you. It doesn't help that the rewards for them are just money, and it's rarely more than a hacker's worth of 2 ATMs for the gold rank. There are 8 missions that give you combo cards, but only 2 of them are for weapons that actually have heavy attacks, meaning the rest just give more PP, and only 3 of them are unique to Off the Record, and I'm being generous in counting the Reaper from Case West in that. Then again, if you don't have any new missions or just aren't into leaderboards, sandbox mode can feel really bearing, as you can't trigger boss fights whenever you want beyond the twins, and the bosses and hostile survivors don't offer great rewards beyond money and a single weapon drop. And to end this overly long section, Frank doesn't add much to the game as a character. While the photography system is great, this is easily the most balanced it's ever been, but no missions ever make use of it. There's no integration into the Survivor or Psychopath challenges. Frank's distinct characterization doesn't result in any missions playing out differently from Dead Rising 2. Save for Rebecca's flirting being more genuine this time, the changes to the actual story events don't account for Frank's presence, but instead Chuck's absence. Frank has been awkwardly duct-taped into Chuck's story, right down to survivors getting filler dialogue because they wouldn't or couldn't remove the text prompts from when they accused Chuck of starting the outbreak. Now, to reiterate, I don't hate Off the Record, despite what this section might imply. I'd rather play this than any given Ubisoft, Activision, or EA slop released to the market in the past decade. And at its core, it is still Dead Rising 2. But when ranking all of the Dead Rising games, the 6 main ones are miles above the D-makes in the Christmas special. And when those 6 games have to compete against each other, Off the Record just has a lot of little annoyances I don't get with the others. I can play Off the Record just fine, especially if I'm co-oping with a friend, but it's rarely my go-to title.
Well, this is as far as we're going.
And it's far enough.
I don't know if I can say I play Case Zero more than Off the Record, since I have plenty of times just messed around in the sandbox mode, but Case Zero on paper really should be lower. Why does the glorified demo of Dead Rising 2 beat out its remake for me? Well, part of it is that it's a bite-sized Dead Rising game. Being literally one case file long, the game is 2 hours at max, and that is combining the gameplay, load times, and cutscenes, the last of which I sometimes skip. And if I'm in the mood for some Dead Rising and I don't want to devote the next few days of free time to a playthrough, Case Zero scratches that itch really well. The location and objectives are also really nice. Still Creek, being a dying ghost town that survived off Las Vegas tourists now being overrun with undead Las Vegas evacuees, is a great premise. And the town is really fun to explore, even if you're doing a complete run like I usually do. From the rooftops to the back alleys to the locked doors, this $5 game is pretty tightly packed with little secrets to find. The major objective of the game is finding the motorcycle parts, and that was also a smart call. It establishes Chuck's handyman characteristics, gives a solid objective that doesn't require much story focus, and it grants a bit of variability in how the player completes the game, something that the main series really doesn't do that much. After all, you don't need to get the motorcycle parts in any particular order, but 3 of the parts don't fit in your inventory, so working them into your survivor saving route will pay off. Another unique detail is that, since it's effectively just a single large area, missions are active as soon as you leave the gas station. You will need to make your way to Bob to get the mission marker, but with the exception of the final mission involving his daughter, you can just ignore him and go straight to any given mission if you happen to know when and where one's active. The same goes for Jiminy's request or any given motorcycle parts. Dick's hints are helpful for new players, but not essential to access them. Case Zero manages to keep up with its retail counterparts where the game gets smoother every time you revisit it. I also find myself using less conventional weapons in this game than other entries. Because of how slow Chuck is, I actually find the electric rake preferable to the spiked bat, simply because it attacks fast and doesn't need to be revved up, at least until I find a motorcycle part. The bowling ball is a fast weapon that can one-shot zombies if it lands on the head. The normally outclassed Molotov cocktail becomes my go-to PP grinding tool thanks to the large hordes outside the gas station. Chuck's low health bar means that the beer hat is a lot more viable than one might think. And this is the only entry in the Dead Rising 2 saga where I get any regular use out of the assault rifle. Finally, the level up system does actually cover anything that the first 5 levels in base Dead Rising 2 can. Sometimes I get a durable Chuck with fast escapes from zombies. Sometimes I get a speed upgrade in 2 inventory slots. Sometimes I get up to 3 combo cards. And that's where the biggest downsides kick in. You can absolutely get a bad run where you only get the fast escapes and combo cards and next to no meaningful upgrades. Now, for this video that didn't happen. I got an inventory upgrade, the jump kick, and some health. But some players can get really unlucky with their level ups, and I wouldn't blame anyone who had a sour taste in their mouth from it. I also wish there was a New Game Plus reward of some kind for getting the best ending, be it Chuck's default costume, access to a skateboard to move around the map faster, or maybe the light machine gun for some serious firepower. But even with those shortcomings in mind, Case Zero is a game I revisit from time to time. Where Off the Record often left me wishing I was playing the base game instead, Case Zero is more of a unique bite-sized experience that can scratch that itch for playing a Dead Rising game without needing any massive time commitment to see it through to the end.
Amal, How original.
Yep, the first Dead Rising falls just short of the top 3. Well, okay, not just short, I do prefer the other 3 above it by a bit. Because, yeah, while the first Dead Rising is my favorite entry in the series to make videos on, especially since you guys like watching them, it's not my favorite to just casually play. So why is that? Why does this star not shine brighter when I'm not recording? Cause, make no mistake, like the rest of B tier, it is a good game. It's a sandbox that has a strong sense of structure, often one of the weakest parts of sandbox games, courtesy of the time limit, with an absurd amount of weapons that you can use to boot. And I can't just point to the AI and call it a day, since I've long figured out how to mitigate the non-existing pathfinding of the rock-stupid survivors. I also can't say that this YouTube channel has burnt me out on the game, because if I made this video 4 or 5 years ago, the first Dead Rising would have likely placed below Off the Record. If anything, this channel has given me a newfound appreciation for the OG title. So, for my actual problems, let's start with the bosses. I don't like a good deal of them. Sure, the characterization's pretty good, and it sets the standard for the franchise moving forward, but a lot of bosses in this game I just don't actually enjoy fighting. Cletus, the convicts, the Hall family, Isabella, every fight with Carlito. There's good fights in this game for sure, and I admire the efforts to give them all distinct combat styles, but the psychopath battles are more misses than hits for me. The game also really overdoes it with the Raincoat Cult, especially in Paradise Plaza, to the point where, depending on how RNG spawns them, it can feel like they're a prominent threat over the zombies during day 2. Then there's the time bomb section. On top of it being about as fun as the train rush section in Dead Rising 2, minus the part where you can skip it in 10 seconds, I just don't think it gets enough criticism for how stupid of a plot point this is. You mean to tell me that the parasites in their cocoons, which, remind you, can't survive being stepped on, are going to be able to survive being sent into the atmosphere by an explosion, and that they're not just going to splat on the landing if they somehow survive that? I swear, people will forgive Dead Rising 1 for literally anything it does. But I think my biggest issue has to be the special forces. Aside from the final story segment spamming high-health gun-toting enemies, which I do not find particularly fun to fight, they're the reason there's nothing to do for the final hour of gameplay. Even if you abandon the story, the last 60 minutes have no scoops in the mall. This is also why the side missions in Day 2 give so little wiggle room for your routing, and why the single case file missions have to start like 10 minutes after the case files that precede them. The special forces arriving leave the game with no time to spare. They also end up emphasizing how little there is to do in the mall. Your trip throughout Case 1 will get you access to every PP activity besides Wonderland Plaza with the ride, and I guess the PP stickers, but I don't find those terribly compelling if I'm honest. So there's really only 8 interactive elements in the mall, and only the stove and ovens cover multiple zones at that. The only secret weapons in this game are the SMGs and that katana in Paradise Plaza. I guess if you're feeling generous, the frozen fish and Leisure Park count. The Parkview Mall just doesn't compare to Fortune City's slots and minigames, or even the untold stories and ZDC speakers of Los Perdidos. And while the sequels constantly have me finding weapons tucked away in locations I never bothered exploring, a third of the stores in the mall don't have anything beyond coat hangers and cash registers, and going off the beaten path usually just rewards a healing item. Now, if I'm going strictly on quality and what I think would appeal to people, I'd put Off the Record higher than the first Dead Rising. But since this tier list is to show how I, funny Servbot Jakers himself, prefer to play the series, what lifts this game up after everything I've said? Well, first, Off the Record's ranking is in part a display for how most of what's good about it was already good in Dead Rising 2, and with those little issues, I'd rather just play the base game. Meanwhile, despite having bigger problems with the first Dead Rising, it's still a fairly unique experience in the series, and the original version of it is still the best way to experience it for me. I do like how fast the game plays. The guns have a lot of impact here. I like how weird some of the really good weapons in the game are, like the mannequin torso, the hockey stick, the shelf, or the soda cans. While the AI pathfinding is inexcusable, I do like the little reactions survivors have with Frank and each other in this game. The OST is phenomenal, perhaps the most identifiable element of the game. The ability to cook food in the ovens is cool, however disposable it may be. And it does have the best integration of the camera system for the side content. And while it may not have done most of the core gameplay as well as the sequels for me, the foundation it laid is still satisfying to play, going on 20 years later.
Information about this area is limited, since anybody who's ever known about this place has either disappeared or been lobotomized. Judging from your comments throughout the course of this event, I'd have to guess the latter in your case, Grease. You! But yeah, that would kind of explain a lot of things. The blurred vision, the metal plate in my head, the mysterious foreign object up my ass. Oh, the last one's mine. Be sure to rinse it off when you're done.
If I had to guess what Dead Rising game you would really like to play but literally can't, it would be Case West. You can't get it on the Xbox 360 storefront anymore, it never came to PC or PlayStation, never got a physical release of any kind, the Xbone and the Nextbox are such massive flops that Microslop is turning the brand into a subscription service. And 360 emulation is so unreliable that even the high seas might not let you play it. Which is a shame, since it's a top-tier entry in the franchise. The only reason I played Case Zero more is because it's shorter. But before I get to praising this game, I do need to talk about how they just dropped the ball with co-op, even if it doesn't affect the ranking for the video. Because yes, it was that bad. Most people criticize that you can't select between Chuck or Frank when playing in single player, and given that Frank has his OG moveset, and that he uses a lot of weapons like he did back in 2006, that's a fair complaint, and I agree that that should have been a choice. But no one ever brings up how Frank gets screwed over in terms of leveling up. The camera only gets PP from PP stickers, which Chuck can do in this game as well, and Frank doesn't get any of the combo cards for the 10 returning weapons. He only gets 3 combo cards to his name, which means that he cannot use the execution moves for the Shocker or the AoE pound of the Impact Blaster. But for single player, this means that the Sterilizer, Zap and Shine, and Reaper just don't have combo cards. So yeah, it's even more scuffed than it gets credit for. But as someone who plays these games for single player, I find this to be an overall improved Case Zero. It effectively has a level cap of 10 instead of 5, but it starts you at level 40 with some above average stats, but still low enough to where you might die early game. Since you max out at level 50, you get to have the full maxed out experience, and you really feel the impact of every level in this game. Gun-toting security guards and melee-focused zombie handlers give you human enemies to face for the whole game. Hazard units, which I didn't get far enough in my recording to show off, serve as mini-bosses, and the gas zombies roam the laboratory sections of the research facility. You get the stimulation of endgame Dead Rising with the satisfaction of a clean-cut opening. Of all the new weapons though, I'd have to say the electric prod is definitely my favorite, and there's a reason it's the one that came back. The choice of which combo weapons to bring back were really smart. Out of the 10 returning options, the laser sword is the only normal melee weapon you can build. The rest are either combo grenades, PP grinders, or the flamethrower, so you'll start to notice which of the base weapons can handle what. It turns out that a brick to the head kills things quite quickly, who knew? AI Frank West can use any weapon Chuck can if you're willing to give it to him, combo weapons included, but his break as he uses them. So it goes more along the lines of giving Frank a power boost when you really need some help. AI Frank is invincible, but he'll be incapped for a while if he takes enough damage, so you still need to play the game yourself. They also made the smart call to not need to wait on AI Frank to be close to load into a new area, but the smartest call with Case West was the survivors. With the exception of Lisa, the survivor scientists of Phenotrans are all unmarked, requiring you to regularly explore and re-explore the fairly small facility for each mission. Once you help them with whatever they need, they'll escape from the facility themselves, which also eliminates the need for a safe zone. Which makes sense, Frank and Chuck are in hostile enemy territory, and these guys would know a way out. It also means that the player can spend most of their time exploring and fighting, something that benefits a smaller game like Case West. Here's hoping to someday Case West getting porting to modern day systems without the need of a deluxe remaster.
Well, I don't know how to tell you all this, but this is an excellent sausage!
Dead Rising 3 is a game that I tend to think higher of as time goes on, except for the football zombies. I will never like those. But on top of this being my favorite Dead Rising game to co-op whenever I feel the urge to, its downsides have just mattered to me less over time, while its strengths have stuck out more and more. Doesn't the story suck? I mean, they couldn't even get Nick's number right. Shouldn't it be impossible to get immersed in the story if they get something that basic wrong? Well, despite how shockingly common that argument is, I really don't think it's worth getting hung up on Nick's number not lining up with any of the guys on the list. Like, if they did catch that and gave him an appropriate tattoo, nothing in the story changes beyond a texture and the number they say out loud. The fact that he's supposed to be one of those orphans is far more important. And I brought up the whole thing about the time bomb sequence in the first game, because while I've met plenty of people who say Nick not being on the list ruins the story, those same people, from my experience, have never given Dead Rising 1's plot enough critical look to notice two cutscenes contradicting each other. So between how little would change if issues like that were fixed, and knowing the fanbase doesn't care when they're invested in the game in the first place, I don't put much stock into those kind of oversights. If anything, I think the conversation should be that the tattoo should have been something more creative than a literal number. But okay, doesn't the story ruin Chuck and Isabella? Not really. Let's start with Chuck, since he's the easier one to talk about. While it's not an ideal fate for his character, and there was no reason to break up him with Stacy even if she doesn't appear in-game, Chuck becoming a mob boss to pay for Zombrex after it became a black market drug is very in character. I mean, he already fought against the military in Case Zero, so that's hardly new ground. Plus, they did try to keep his hands clean by his only threats being to Gary for letting Katie go, and at Nick for possibly getting between him and his daughter. Both of those actions are pretty in character for him. When Katie is at risk, all bets are off and Chuck goes cold. But he's otherwise still an alright guy. Now, for Isabella's story, well, I actually do have plenty of issues with that, but the part that everyone hates is her being the villain, and that's the only part I do not mind. I want to do a video on her one day, although the 3 games I need to play through and record to get the cutscenes I'm not looking forward to. But here's why I don't mind her being the villain. I've never liked how the first Dead Rising tried to have it both ways with Isabella.
I like where this is going.
The moment she teams up with Frank, the game acts like she wasn't a willing accomplice to Carlito's plan to murder 53,000 people. Seriously, her dialogue starts acting like Carlito is now a lone rogue agent after she's gone to the security room. Suddenly, Carlito's medical technician of a little sister, who he claims he needed for his plan to work, wasn't needed for him to make 50 little ticking time bombs. When the first game twists her and Carlito's backstory like a pretzel to let her be involved in everything for the first half, yet suddenly uses kid gloves to make Carlito the bad one, I can't blame the Dead Rising 3 writing team for wanting to do something with this more, well, unsavory side of Isabella, who told Frank and Brad they, as Americans, were responsible for what she and her brother did. There's a lot more to it than that, but at that point it would deserve its own video, so let's leave it there and move on for now. On a more positive note, I've really come around to enjoy how they use Nick's awkwardness to make him a reluctant hero, having to learn how to swim on the fly, alongside the more traditional character arc of him becoming a more decisive, action-oriented character, as well as more confident in himself. The other story characters are fine, although Diego, Annie, and Rhonda would have really benefited from a cutscene where they got a one-on-one conversation with Nick, especially given how much heavy lifting that did for Gary. Really, the worst part of Dead Rising 3's plot for me are the villains. The only antagonist with any real presence is the wheelchair-bound Marion. Hemlock takes too long to show up for his own good, and Red is a twist I liked better with Sullivan. Moving on to the gameplay, doesn't the level-up system and super combo weapons break the game? Well, yes, very much so, but I can say the same for the small chainsaw in the first Dead Rising. And frankly, the ability to build Nick with different playstyles in mind or make weird challenge runs far outweighs how abusable they can be. While I don't think Dead Rising needs to let you select your upgrades, the classic system worked just fine, the freedom this system allows is deep enough for me to enjoy it. And frankly, balance is a franchise-wide problem. The idea that Dead Rising 3 is exceptionally worse at this than the others, I just don't agree with. Frankly, my biggest issue with the upgrade system is that there's not a skill tree devoted to your survivor posse, despite there being several upgrades devoted to them. Oh, right, the survivors. Why would it not bother me that they're all fetch quests? Well, because as I brought up in Shop Till You Drop, the Dead Rising 1 survivors are largely just talking until they follow you. Sure, they can get creative with it, like having to leave Gil to scare him sober or not do what Ross asks of you, but most of them are just talking to them. I've simply never heard a compelling argument for why fetch quests are so much worse, given that the missions in Dead Rising 3 are about as well contextualized as they were in the first game. And I do like being able to take survivors in and out of the safe house as needed, even if most of them don't get very good stats. Even the map of Los Perdidos I think gets a bad rap. I used to think it was a poorly designed map, but I've actually come to realize it's a very well-made sandbox that does a piss-poor job teaching players to navigate it. When you put a bunch of roads into a realistic city, people will instinctively follow them and then get frustrated when that doesn't work. As such, even going on 13 years later, most people don't realize that Dead Rising 3 was designed to have you take detours to go on off-beaten paths in a very apocalyptic style, like driving through destroyed walls or over rooftops. The walled-off centers in each section are just to give on-foot sections like the old maps used to have, so it's not literally just Grand Theft Zombie. I think a solution to this problem would have been making some of the survival challenges races where you go through rings, so that way players would be forced to recognize these detours. I could go on, there's a lot I haven't talked about, but I think you get the point. I find Dead Rising 3 fun to play, and I think a lot of the problems are either overblown or even hypocritical. I did not intend to make this section as long as it was, but I feel like calling Dead Rising 3 anything more than mid, especially after admitting off the record just isn't a favorite of mine, is legit the hottest take I have here.
Alright, let's wipe them off and hose them down. Let me hear it, people! And show some love for our winner tonight!
Oh, Dead Rising 2, how I love thee. Let me count the ways. Oh, and no Survivor AI praise, that's easy mode. I like the map layout of Fortune City. It loops around really well while avoiding the dead ends like the home saloon or the movie theater had back in Willamette. Plus, the themes are a lot stronger while not going overboard like Deluxe Remaster did. The weapon variety is much stronger. And part of this is on the combo weapons getting many unique attacks, like letting you kill zombies by playing a guitar or weaponizing a bucket on a zombie's head. But the base weapons cover it really well. The spear attack animation have more weapons that use it, like the long stick or the pitchfork. There are fast jab weapons like the power drill and the cement saw. CQC weapons like the boxing gloves and the training arms were added for more variety in melee combat. And many weapons mix and match light and heavy attacks, minimizing the amount of glorified reskins compared to the first game. Secret weapons are way more prevalent. Every gun besides the 6-shooter has multiple hiding spot locations on the map, alongside stronger items like the chainsaws and battle axes getting far more unconventional hiding spots. Dead Rising 2 just very consistently rewards the player for climbing up something or going off the beaten path. Explosives are not locked until endgame, distraction items are a proper weapon category this time, and elemental damage gives many more ways to deal with zombies. The fire extinguisher has gone from being a very niche choice in the original game to a great option at any level. The Zombrex posters are just far superior and far more interesting to the newspaper clippings known as PP stickers, and I'm tired of pretending that they're not. Money is a great addition to the gameplay loop. On top of it being a resource that's easy to contextualize for any mission, it adds much more interactions to the map. From smashing ATMs to buying snacks from vending machines, to gambling at the various casinos, the extra mini-games, cash really is what makes Fortune City the most lively location in the series. I also just really like the characters. Chuck is a very well-defined protagonist. While most people think of him as a Boy Scout compared to Frank, he's actually pretty cold. Katie, and towards the end Stacy, are the only people he has any real deep attachment to these days. And his dark one-liners against the bosses that kill people in front of him help sell that disconnect, similar to how it was important for Frank to have his more humane moments in the original Dead Rising game to counterbalance his caustic nature. The other main characters are pretty good too. Stacy is the most developed mission control in the series, thanks to the Zombrex missions. Rebecca's just fun to listen to, especially next to Chuck, who really doesn't want to be here. And Sullivan doesn't get a lot of credit for being a well-handled twist villain, because unlike a lot of the more modern twist villains, Sullivan isn't defined by that twist. Even if you end up seeing his betrayal coming, how suddenly he offs Rebecca and the chilling nature behind his motivation makes him much more memorable than a mere plot twist, something that admittedly Chris Redfield wasn't able to avoid in Resident Evil 8. But the reigning champ of characters has got to be TK. This charismatic, ever-present, scenery-chewing bastard is peak villainy for me. From how early he's introduced, to the fact that he is the constant threat for half of the game, to where even after the bigger scope antagonists of Phenotrance move in, TK still manages to be the one causing your problems. Kanye Wesker here is a franchise high I don't think they will ever be able to hit again. And finally, another series high that I don't think they'll ever be able to match is the gas zombies. Between the green fog blocking your view and how lethal even a couple of these guys can be, while still not being as obnoxious as something like the fresh zombies or even the football zombies, the gas zombies are the only time the gameplay of Dead Rising is truly scary. So many of these individual points I could turn into videos on their own, and I didn't even get to things like the bosses, or how Cell Dweller and Blue Stolly's music is so natural for the series. But while I do wish a few quality of life improvements from Off the Record were present in Dead Rising 2, the package is just very cleanly and neatly put together, making for a game I can always go back to. And with that, you now know what I think of the series as a whole, at least in the broad strokes. The mobile game is worthless to the point of hilarity, Dead Rising 4 and Deluxe Remaster are not games I find particularly fun, Chop Till You Drop is pretty alright when you weigh in the good and the bad, Off the Record, Case Zero, and the OG game are fun but not go-to options, Case West and Dead Rising 3 are strong entries, if not criminally underrated, and Dead Rising 2 is my Dead Rising of choice. What are your favorite entries in the series? I'm interested to know, though I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to hear a lot of OG Dead Rising or Off the Record. But hey, it is what it is. And hey, what do you know? This happened to have come out just in time for the 20th anniversary of the franchise. Isn't that convenient? Well, here's to another year of videos, I wonder what I'll do this year.